You call that ink? I have seen better drawings on bathroom walls, Grandpa. The words cut through the warm California air like a knife. It was Coronado, the legendary naval base where generations of Navy SEALs had been forged. Young men, their heads freshly shaved, their bodies carved from endless hours of training, carried themselves as if they already owned the title of warrior. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, stopped near the barracks to sneer at an old man kneeling in the dirt. That old man was Frank Nelson, 84 years old, his knees pressed against the soil of a small garden just outside the main training compound. His hands, gnarled by time but still steady, worked carefully around the petals of a bed of marigolds. The California sun fell across his faded shirt sleeves, rolled to the elbows, revealing weathered forearms. On his left arm, just above the veins that once carried the fire of youth, was a tattoo. It was old, blurred, nothing like the crisp professional ink of today, a crude sketch, almost childlike a frog holding a trident. The recruits burst out laughing. One of them smirked. "Is that a tadpole with a fork, Pops? What is that supposed to mean? Were you a cook in the tadpole division?" The group of candidates closed in their shadows, falling across Frank's flowers. They were young, full of arrogance, charged with the invincible belief that they were the strongest men in the world. To them, Frank was nobody, just a gardener, a relic, a background prop in their story of greatness. But Frank did not look up. He pressed the soil down around a bloom, slow and methodical. His silence made the recruits uneasy, as if their taunts were stones thrown into a calm, endless lake. The leader, a recruit with a name tag that read Peterson, bent closer. His smirk sharpened into something cruel. "Come on, Gramps, don't be shy. Tell us the war story that goes with that little doodle. Or did you get it on a drunken weekend in Tijuana?" By now, others had stopped to watch. Sailors passing by, even a few civilians working on base. Some chuckled, others frowned, sensing the imbalance in the scene. Three young giants circling a frail man who barely seemed to notice them. Peterson raised his voice, playing to the crowd. "Look at this guy. He probably hangs around here all day, trying to soak up glory he never earned. Bet you were a supply clerk stamping boxes while the real men were out fighting." At last, Frank looked up. His eyes were pale, watery blue, framed by wrinkles carved from decades of sun and storm. But they held something the recruits did not recognize, a weight, a history. Peterson's grin faltered for just a moment. "It's just a memory, son," Frank said. His voice was low, gravelly, but steady. The words were calm, too calm, and that only made Peterson push harder. He jabbed a thick finger into the faded tattoo. A memory of what? Forgetting to reorder the ketchup. "This is a base for warriors, old man. You don't belong here." Frank's silence endured. His gaze did not waver. He had faced rifles in jungles so dark the sun never reached the ground. He had heard the whine of bullets tearing through night air. Compared to that, the buzzing of these arrogant boys was nothing more than flies at a picnic. But they did not know that. To them, this quiet gardener was just an old man. And so the stage was set. The recruits laughed louder, the crowd leaned in closer, and the weight of the moment pressed down like the California sun itself. None of them yet realized who Frank Nelson truly was, or the storm that was already gathering just beyond their sight. Peterson wasn't finished. The silence of the old man made him restless, made him feel mocked without a word being spoken. He wanted to break that calm. He wanted to prove that age meant weakness. "Maybe we should check your bag," Grandpa Peterson sneered, yanking Frank's worn canvas satchel off the ground. He dug through it with exaggerated flair, pulling out a pair of gloves, a rusty trowel, and finally a battered silver thermos. He held it high for the crowd. "What's this?" Prune juice laughter erupted, sharp, ugly, echoing across the courtyard. Some of the onlookers shook their heads, others muttered under their breath. But still no one stepped forward. The authority of SEAL candidates, even before they earned their tridents, was enough to make lesser men hesitate. Frank remained motionless, his face unreadable. He had learned long ago that the loudest man in the room was usually the weakest. He had learned patience the hard way in ambushes where he had stayed still for days, in rivers where one ripple could give away a position and cost lives. But patience brought memories. And as Peterson's thumb pressed into that faded tattoo, trying to smudge the lines as if they were dirt, Frank felt the world shift. The California sun faded into darkness. The laughter dissolved into a suffocating heat. Suddenly, he was no longer on his knees in Coronado. He was back in the jungle. The smell came first, thick mangrove mud, sulfurous and choking. Mosquitoes whined in his ears, the sound endless. His cheeks stung where salt water had seeped into a cut. The air pressed down like a wet blanket. He heard the faint thrum of a patrol boat riverine engine in the distance, a lifeline and a beacon for death all at once. And then came the memory of the needle. Not a sterile parlor, not the hum of an electric gun. A real sewing needle heated over a lighter sterilized in whiskey. His teammate Mac's steady hands guiding it dipped into ink made from rifle cleaning soot and more of that harsh whiskey. The rain hammered down monsoon sheets, soaking their ponchos. 3 men huddled under the makeshift cover ghosts in a war that did not officially exist. Each of them young. Each of them with faces painted in black and green eyes, hollow from weeks in the field. And yet in that moment, they were alive. Frank remembered the sting as the design was carved into his skin, a frog clutching a trident. Their own symbol, their own secret. It wasn't for show. It wasn't meant to impress strangers in bars or girlfriends back home. It was a covenant, a bond, a promise carved in mud and blood. We go where no one else dares, and we bring each other home. The memory burned bright, then faded, leaving him once more in the California sun. The laughter was still there. The recruits were still circling, but the old tattoo no longer felt faint. It felt alive, carrying the weight of men long gone. Peterson didn't see it. He only saw what he thought was weakness. He grabbed Frank's thin bicep and jerked upward. "All right, Grandpa. Show's over. Let's get you to base security. Maybe they can figure out which nursing home you escaped from." The crowd gasped. That line had crossed into open humiliation. Peterson's grip was firm, but the wiry muscle beneath his fingers was not as soft as he expected. For the first time, Frank's eyes changed. The calm blue deepened, sharpened into something ancient, something cold. It was the kind of look that measured force with precision, the kind of look that could decide in a fraction of a second exactly how many bones to break. But Frank did not strike. He allowed himself to be pulled halfway up his joints, creaking his body frail, but still balanced. He sighed not in fear, but in disappointment. The lesson, it seemed, would not be given gently. The recruits were too blind to see it, but someone else had noticed. Across the courtyard, half hidden behind a palm tree, Master Chief Petty Officer Riggs was watching. Riggs had been in the Navy 30 years. He had seen arrogance, foolishness, and cruelty. But what he saw now was something different, something sacred being defiled, and more than that, something familiar. His eyes narrowed on the crude tattoo. Memory stirred. He had seen it before years ago in an old unofficial record of the 1st Naval Special Warfare Operators, a history whispered about but never confirmed. His blood ran cold. That symbol, that frog with a trident. That was no joke, it was legend. Riggs's breath caught in his throat. He had read about this once, buried deep in an old binder that circulated only among instructors. A story that was never confirmed, that lived half in shadow, half in myth. They called them the Delta Frogmen, 3 men who moved like ghosts through the rivers and swamps of Vietnam, striking targets the government denied even existed. The crude tattoo had been their mark, not for the world, for each other, for survival. And now one of those men was here. Not in a story, not in a file, but standing only yards away, being mocked by boys too young to know the weight of the history under their boots. Riggs's first instinct was fury. He wanted to storm across the quad, rip those recruits apart with words sharp enough to leave scars. But then he looked at the old man again, at Frank Nelson. That calm, that silence. It wasn't fear. It was something greater. Riggs felt his chest tighten. This wasn't his moment to intervene. This was something far beyond his authority. He turned sharply, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Captain Thorne," he muttered, scrolling through his contacts until he reached the base commander's personal aide. His thumb pressed the call button. The line clicked. Lieutenant Price speaking. "This is Master Chief Riggs," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Get me the captain, right now." "Sir, he's in a command brief with senior staff. He asked not to be disturbed unless the Russians are landing at Imperial Beach," Riggs snapped. "Listen to me. You tell Captain Thorne he needs to get to the grinder immediately, and you tell him this is about Frank Nelson. There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Frank Nelson. "Are you certain I'm staring right at him?" Riggs growled. "And he's about to be manhandled by 3 SEAL candidates who have no idea they're poking a sleeping god. Move." He hung up without waiting for a reply. His pulse hammered in his ears. Back at the flower bed, Peterson was still gripping Frank's arm, trying to haul him up like a misbehaving child. The recruits laughed louder, playing to the crowd. The onlookers shifted uneasily, whispers spreading. "This has gone too far. Someone should stop it." Yet no one moved. Frank let himself be pulled to his feet. For a moment, the California sun caught his profile, sharp and resolute, even beneath the weight of 84 years. His eyes flickered with that same cold fire Riggs had seen from across the yard. But Frank stayed silent. His restraint was almost unbearable. Inside, he knew exactly how much force it would take to snap the boy's wrist to put him on the ground, gasping. Yet he chose not to. Not because he couldn't, but because he understood something deeper. Pride was its own noose. Riggs strode away from the scene phone, still clenched in his hand, heading toward the main gate. He didn't need to see what happened next. Reinforcements were coming. Inside the headquarters building, Captain Thorne was halfway through a dry PowerPoint slide on budget allocations when his aide burst into the room without knocking. The young lieutenant's face was pale, his voice shaking. "Sir Master Chief Riggs reports a Condition 1 emergency." Thorne frowned, irritation flashing across his features. Condition 1. The only Condition 1 worth interrupting this meeting is an invasion. The aide swallowed hard. He said, "Sir, he said it's about Frank Nelson." The name fell into the room like a grenade. Every officer froze. A command master chief at the far end of the table audibly gasped. Frank Nelson. Thorne whispered, his voice suddenly stripped of all annoyance. He seized the phone from his aide's hand. "Riggs, talk to me." For 10 seconds he listened. His jaw clenched, his face shifting from disbelief to shock, and then to a cold, controlled fury. He's where Thorne barked, with who he shoved his chair back, standing in one smooth motion. "Get my vehicle now. Alert every department head and command master chief on this base. Full dress uniforms if they can manage it. I want them all at the grinder in 5 minutes. Move!" The room exploded into motion. The PowerPoint slide on the wall budget charts and numbers glowed uselessly as the officers fled. On the quad outside, the recruits were still laughing. Frank stood tall, Peterson's hand gripping his arm like a shackle. The crowd had no idea that a storm was about to break over their heads. A storm built not of weather, but of brass, authority, and fury. The first sign was a distant wail, not the whoop of a police siren, but the piercing, unmistakable cry of military command vehicles. Heads turned. The sound grew louder, closer, multiplying until it seemed to rattle the very pavement. And then they appeared. A convoy of black SUVs and command trucks roared onto the access road, tires screeching as they swung into a semicircle around the courtyard. Doors flew open in perfect unison. Out stepped Captain Thorne. His service dress whites gleamed in the afternoon sun, the golden eagle of his rank catching the light. His face was a thundercloud carved from stone. Behind him came his senior staff officers and master chiefs, whose collective authority could make steel buckle. Together they moved with singular purpose, their eyes locked on the small drama unfolding at the flower bed. The courtyard fell silent. The laughter evaporated. Recruits froze, their cocky postures collapsing into something that looked like terror. Peterson's hand was still on Frank's arm, but now it felt like holding a live grenade. He let go as though burns snapping to a shaky attention. Thorne walked straight through the crowd as if parting the sea. He did not look at Peterson. He did not look at the onlookers. His burning gaze was fixed on Frank Nelson. He stopped 3 feet in front of the old man, and then with a precision that sliced the air itself, Captain Thorne snapped to attention and delivered the sharpest salute of his decorated career. The gesture landed like a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A Navy base commander saluting the gardener, Mr. Nelson. Thorne's voice boomed deep and resonant, carrying to every corner of the quad. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir. I offer my most sincere apologies for the reception you have received from my men." The recruits stared, eyes wide, minds failing to process what they were witnessing. The man they had mocked moments ago was being saluted by the commander himself. Thorne turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon Peterson and his companions. His voice dropped, but lost none of its deadly power. You three, do you see this man? Do you see the tattoo you found so amusing? He didn't wait for an answer. His words became a history lesson hammered out like steel on an anvil. This is Frank Nelson. Before there were SEALs, he was a frogman in the underwater demolition teams. He hit the beaches at Incheon when your grandfathers were still in diapers. When this nation asked for the impossible in Vietnam, he was one of the founding members of SEAL Team 1. He volunteered for missions so secret the record still claims they never happened. Thorne's gaze swept back to the faded ink. That tadpole with a fork, as you called it, is not a joke. It is the original hand-drawn insignia of a three-man recon unit he led. A unit so effective they were known only as ghosts. They called themselves the Delta Frogmen. They went into places that made hell look like a holiday, and unlike almost every other unit of its kind, he brought every single man home. Every one. The silence was absolute. The weight of 70 years of hidden history pressed down upon that patch of grass and flowers. The recruits trembled. The onlookers stood stunned. And Frank Nelson, the quiet old man, with dirt on his knees and marigold petals on his fingers, simply shifted his weight and gave a small embarrassed wave as if to say at ease. Captain Thorne held his salute a moment longer, then slowly lowered his hand. His eyes never left the recruits who now stood pale and trembling, their arrogance stripped away like sand under the tide. You are candidates for an elite brotherhood, he said, his voice calm but lethal. The first principle of that brotherhood is honor. The second is respect. You have shown neither. You dishonored yourselves the uniform you hoped to wear, and above all this man to whom every one of us owes a debt we can never repay. The words fell like hammer blows. As of this moment, your candidacies are suspended pending my personal review. Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. Now, get out of my sight. The three recruits mumbled a shaky, yes, sir, before retreating under the scorching weight of hundreds of eyes. Their boots slapped against the pavement like the footsteps of condemned men. Frank placed a gentle hand on the captain's arm. They're just kids, he said softly. Full of fire, full of vinegar. We were the same once. His gaze drifted across the crowd of young sailors, their faces a mix of awe and shame. Pride, he said, his voice carrying with quiet strength, is a heavy anchor. It can hold you steady in a storm, or it can drag you straight to the bottom. The trick is knowing which it's doing. The words settled over the courtyard like a benediction. Not anger, not condemnation. A lesson freely given from a man who had already paid the price for wisdom. In that moment, the California sun seemed to fade, replaced by the dripping green canopy of a jungle half a world away. A much younger Frank Nelson sat on an ammo crate, sketching a crude frog holding a trident onto waterproof paper with a piece of charcoal. His two teammates leaned in faces painted for war. What is it, Frankie, one whispered. It's for us, young Frank replied with a grin. We're ghosts in the Delta. Frogmen. This is our mark. The memory flickered, then dissolved back into the present. The fallout was swift. Captain Thorne made the incident a lesson for the entire command. A new training module was added, not of tactics or weapons, but of history and respect. Every new recruit learned the story of Frank Nelson and the Delta Frogmen so they would remember that the ground beneath their boots was sacred. Peterson and his friends were not expelled. That would have been too simple. Instead, they were rolled back, forced to restart their brutal training from day one. Humbled, broken down, rebuilt. Weeks later, Peterson, weary and raw from endless drills, spotted Frank again, tending marigolds in the sun. His chest tightened. He approached, standing silently until the old man looked up. Mr. Nelson, Peterson said, his voice hoarse. I wanted to say, I'm sorry for my disrespect, for everything. Frank studied him for a long moment. The cocky smirk was gone. In its place, exhaustion and something better, humility. Frank reached into his cooler, pulled out a bottle of cold water, and handed it over. I know, son, he said. Lesson learned is more important than the mistake made. Keep your head down, your heart right. The water doesn't care how proud you are. It only cares if you can swim. Peterson took the bottle, nodding silently. A promise passed between the old warrior and the young. Because heroes do not always wear medals. They do not always stand on parade grounds. Sometimes they kneel in the dirt planting flowers no one else bothers to notice. Heroes walk among us every day. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to BR Veteran Stories for more untold stories of quiet, unassuming heroes.